A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. So, Daniel sent us this one. It is a heavy topic, especially given the news coming out of the north. He wrote, quote, "Tragically, the search for survivors in Haifa yesterday ended with the finding of bodies beneath the rubble of a building hit by an Iranian missile. When search and rescue crews have the grim task of attempting to find survivors under rubble, how do they do it?" End quote. It is a sobering question, Herman, but one that feels incredibly relevant right now. I think most people see the footage of the Home Front Command on the news, and they just see chaos and dust. But there is a massive amount of engineering and protocol behind how they actually navigate a collapsed structure.
Herman Poppleberry here. And you are right, Corn. It looks like a frantic scramble to the untrained eye, but urban search and rescue, or USAR, is one of the most disciplined and technically demanding fields in existence. What happened in Haifa on April 5th was a 7-story residential building partially collapsing after a direct hit. When you have that much mass, thousands of tons of concrete and rebar, pancaking down, the physics of finding a human being inside that mess is a race against entropy. By the way, fun fact for the listeners, today's episode is actually powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash. It is helping us parse through the technical data on these rescue protocols.
It is interesting because Daniel mentioned the golden hour, which we usually think of in terms of getting a trauma patient to surgery. But in search and rescue, that hour starts the second the missile impacts. How do they even begin? Do they just start digging from the top? Or is there a more systematic way to peel back the layers?
They almost never start by just digging blindly. That is the fastest way to cause a secondary collapse and kill anyone who might have survived the initial blast. The first thing that happens is what they call a structural triage. Engineers from the Home Front Command arrive, and they are looking at the skeleton of the building. They need to know if the remaining parts of the structure are stable enough to even send rescuers in. If a wall is leaning at a certain degree, or if the load-bearing columns are sheared, they have to shore those up with hydraulic jacks or timber before a single person steps onto the rubble pile.
So it's like a giant, deadly game of Jenga? You have to stabilize the pieces before you can even think about moving them?
Think of it as propping before popping. In Haifa, they actually had to use a 500-ton crane just to hold a structural slab in place while rescuers crawled underneath it. If that slab had shifted even 2 inches, the air pocket below would have vanished. They use laser levels and tilt meters. They can detect a movement as small as a millimeter. If an alarm goes off indicating the building is shifting, everyone has to evacuate the pile immediately. It's an agonizing delay, but necessary.
I imagine the silence protocol is one of the first things they do once the perimeter is set. I've seen videos of this where everyone just stops. It is eerie.
It is incredibly powerful. The lead rescuer will call out for quiet, and I mean absolute silence. No generators, no idling trucks, no talking. They station rescuers at different points around the debris. Then, a specialist will take a piece of rebar or a hammer and tap a specific rhythmic pattern, usually 3 distinct knocks, on a structural beam that is still connected to the deeper parts of the pile. They are essentially using the building's own skeleton as a telephone line. Sound travels much faster and clearer through steel and concrete than it does through air and dust.
And they are listening for a response, right? But what if the person is unconscious or too weak to shout back? How long can they actually maintain that silence?
They usually hold it for 5 to 10 minutes at a time. It's a physical strain on the rescuers just to stay that still. And you're right, a shout is rare. They are listening for micro sounds, the scratching of a fingernail on a pipe, or the sound of a wedding ring tapping against a radiator. In one famous case in an earthquake zone, a rescuer heard a sound so faint he thought it was a bird, but it turned out to be a survivor clicking their tongue against the roof of their mouth because they were too dehydrated to speak.
That is where the triangulation comes in. Even if the survivor can only scratch a wall or weakly tap back once, having rescuers stationed in a circle allows them to hear the direction that sound is coming from. If the person on the north side hears it loudly, and the person on the south side hears it faintly, they can start to narrow down the specific void where that person is trapped. But as you pointed out, human ears have limits. That is why the technology they're using now, like the Finder system, is such a game changer.
It's the difference between guessing and knowing. I mean, imagine trying to find a specific watch ticking inside a dumpster full of gravel. That's the level of difficulty we're talking about.
I remember reading about Finder. That was originally a NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory project, right? It uses microwave radar to find a heartbeat?
It is incredible tech. It is about the size of a carry-on suitcase. It sends out low-power microwave signals that can penetrate up to 30 feet of rubble or 20 feet of solid concrete. What it is looking for is micro-movements. When your heart beats, your chest moves just a fraction of a millimeter. When you breathe, your rib cage expands. The Finder radar can distinguish between the rhythmic movement of a human heart and the random shifting of debris or the movement of a dog or a swaying curtain. In Haifa, they were using these units to scan for life signs before they even committed to a heavy dig.
But wait, how does it handle interference? If you have rescuers walking around or a fan blowing nearby, doesn't that create a moving signal that confuses the radar?
That's the genius of the signal processing. The software uses algorithms to cancel out non-rhythmic motion. It's specifically tuned to the frequency of a human heart, which usually falls between 50 and 150 beats per minute. It can actually detect multiple heartbeats at once and give the rescuers a distance and a heading for each one. It's basically turning the rubble into a transparent glass floor for the rescuers.
So, if the radar says, hey, there is a rhythmic pulse 12 feet down at this specific coordinate, how do they get to them without the whole thing shifting? You mentioned the risk of secondary collapse. If you pull the wrong brick, the whole stack comes down.
This is where void analysis becomes the most critical part of the job. Rescuers are trained to recognize how buildings fail. They look for what they call survivable voids. There are a few main types. You have lean-to voids, which is when a floor slab falls but one side stays attached to a wall, creating a triangle of space. Then you have V-shaped voids, where a floor collapses in the middle but the ends stay up. The most dangerous one, and unfortunately what we see a lot in missile strikes on older buildings, is the pancake collapse. This is where the floors just stack directly on top of each other.
In a pancake collapse, is there even a chance for a void? It sounds like there is zero clearance. Is it just a total loss at that point?
It is very grim, but there are what they call individual voids. This is where a heavy piece of furniture, like a solid oak dining table, a heavy-duty refrigerator, or even a cast-iron bathtub, acts as a temporary pillar. It catches the weight of the ceiling just enough to leave a small pocket of air. Rescuers will actually look for where those heavy objects were located on the floor plan. If they know the kitchen was in the northeast corner, they will prioritize digging toward the appliances, hoping someone crawled near them for protection.
That is a level of forensic architecture I think most people don't consider. You aren't just looking for people. You are looking for the ghosts of the furniture that might be keeping them alive. It's like they have to memorize the blueprints of the apartment before it was destroyed.
They do. They often pull the original municipal blueprints or use Google Street View to see where the windows and structural columns were. In the Haifa collapse, they actually interviewed neighbors to ask, where did the family usually keep their piano? Or where was the heavy bookshelf? Because in a pancake collapse, that piano might be the only thing keeping the ceiling 6 inches off the floor.
Now, Daniel mentioned tunneling in his notes. That sounds terrifyingly claustrophobic. You are basically digging a hole into a pile of unstable knives and bricks.
It is the most high-risk maneuver in the Search and Rescue Handbook. In Haifa, the Home Front Command used horizontal tunneling. You start from the side, usually through a basement wall or a lower-level window, and you dig a shaft. But you can't just dig. As you move forward, you have to build a wooden or metal frame behind you. This is called shoring. If the rubble above you shifts even an inch, that frame has to hold the weight of the entire building so you don't get buried along with the people you are trying to save.
What happens if they hit a piece of rebar while they're tunneling? You can't just use a blowtorch in a confined space with potential gas leaks, right?
They have to use hydraulic rebar cutters or reciprocating saws with diamond grit blades, and they have to be incredibly careful about the heat generated by the friction. Everything is slow. They might move only 6 inches of debris per hour. It's not like the movies where they just pull someone out in 5 minutes. It's a grueling, sweaty, terrifying crawl.
And I assume you are dealing with more than just falling rocks. If a missile hits a building, you have broken gas lines, ruptured sewage, and maybe even electrical fires smoldering deep inside.
The atmospheric monitoring is constant. They have sensors that check for methane, carbon monoxide, and explosive gas levels every few minutes. If a gas line is leaking into a void, a single spark from a rescuer's power tool could turn the entire rescue site into a bomb. And then there is the dust. Concrete dust is incredibly alkaline. If you breathe it in for hours, it can cause chemical burns in your lungs. So these rescuers are doing back-breaking labor in heavy respirators, often in spaces so tight they can't even turn their heads.
I also read that they have to worry about secondary devices, or even just unexploded ordnance from the initial strike. If the missile didn't fully detonate, or if there's a second one incoming, the rescuers are sitting ducks.
That's a massive factor in the Haifa response. The Home Front Command has to coordinate with EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal Units. Sometimes the rescue has to pause because they find a piece of the missile casing that looks unstable. You have heroes literally sitting on top of a potential bomb while trying to delicate cut through concrete to save a child. The psychological pressure is immense.
It makes me think about the transition Daniel mentioned, the shift from rescue to recovery. In Haifa, they spent 24 hours in that high adrenaline rescue mode, only to eventually pull out 4 bodies. That has to be a massive psychological blow to the teams.
It is a profound shift. When you are in rescue mode, every second feels like a heartbeat. You are talking to the rubble. You are hoping for a sound. You are pushing your body to the limit because the person on the other side of that slab is still alive in your mind. The moment it becomes a recovery operation, the energy changes. The movements become slower, more somber. The math changes too. You no longer take the same risks with the rescuers' lives because you are no longer racing a clock to save someone. It is about dignity and bringing closure to the families, which is important, but it is a heavy weight to carry.
How do they decide when to make that call? Is it a strictly medical decision based on how long a human can survive, or is it more of a structural decision?
It's a combination. Usually, after 72 to 96 hours, the probability of finding someone alive drops off a cliff. But they also look at the void integrity. If the pile has settled so much that there is no longer any breathable airspace, the mission commander has to make the call. It's the hardest decision in the world. They often bring in fresh teams just to handle the recovery phase, because the initial rescuers are too emotionally invested to stop.
You mentioned the K9 units earlier. Even with microwave radar and acoustic sensors, dogs are still a staple of these teams. Why is that? Is it just that their noses are that much better than our tech?
A dog's nose is still the fastest wide-area sensor we have. A live fine dog is trained specifically to ignore the scent of the deceased. They are looking for the scent of living human cells, breath, and sweat. A dog can clear a massive debris field in 10 minutes that would take a human team with sensors 2 hours to scan. If the dog alerts, then the tech team moves in with the cameras and the heartbeat detectors to confirm. It is a layered approach. You use the dog for speed, the radar for confirmation, and then the cameras for the actual visual.
I've heard that these dogs actually get depressed if they don't find anyone alive for a long time. Is that true, or just an urban legend?
It's actually true. Search dogs are high-drive animals. They view the search as a game of hide and seek. If they keep losing the game, meaning they only find deceased victims or nothing at all, their morale drops. In long-term disaster zones, handlers will actually have a fellow rescuer hide in a mock void, just so the dog can find someone and get a reward. It keeps their focus sharp and their spirits up for the real work.
Let's talk about those cameras. These aren't just GoPros on a stick. They call them search cams or snake cameras, right?
They are high-tech fiber optic probes. The rescuers will use a core drill, which is a specialized tool that can cut a clean 3-inch hole through reinforced concrete without vibrating the whole slab. Once they have that hole, they feed this long, flexible camera down into the void. These cameras have two-way audio, so they can literally look around a room that hasn't seen light in hours, and they can call out, "Can you hear me? We are here to help." That first moment of visual contact, seeing the survivor on a small handheld screen, is what keeps these teams going.
Can you imagine being trapped in total darkness for 20 hours and suddenly a tiny lens with a light on it pokes through the ceiling and starts talking to you? It must feel like a miracle.
It's life-changing. And the audio is crucial. The rescuers use it to perform a field assessment. They'll ask, "Can you move your legs? Are you bleeding? Is there anyone else with you?" This helps the medical team prepare for what kind of trauma they are about to face. If the survivor says they can't feel their legs, the doctors know they need to prepare for crush syndrome protocols immediately.
It is amazing how much of this comes down to managing vibrations. I was surprised to read that in Haifa, they had to reroute traffic and even stop trains blocks away. It seems like a small thing when you are looking at a collapsed skyscraper, but the physics of a rubble pile are so precarious.
A rubble pile is essentially a liquid that has forgotten how to flow. It is held in place by friction and gravity in a very delicate balance. A low-frequency vibration from a heavy truck or a train can act like a lubricant. It causes the smaller pieces of debris to settle, which can shift the larger slabs. If a survivor is in a void held up by a single piece of timber or a twisted piece of rebar, that tiny shift can be the end. So the entire area becomes a no-vibration zone. It is a massive logistical undertaking by the local police and the IDF to essentially freeze a city to keep that pile of rocks still.
Does that apply to the rescue equipment too? I mean, they use jackhammers and saws. How do they balance the need to cut through concrete with the need to stay still?
They use low vibration tools whenever possible. Instead of a traditional jackhammer, they might use a concrete splitter, which uses hydraulic pressure to slowly crack the rock from the inside out without any pounding. Or they use thermal lances that can melt through steel and concrete with almost zero physical impact. Every tool choice is a calculated risk.
It really highlights the golden hour versus reality. We think if you aren't out in 60 minutes, it is over. But Daniel's notes mention people being found after 100 hours. How is that even possible without water, or in that kind of environment?
Humans are incredibly resilient if they have an air pocket and aren't severely bleeding. If you are in a survivable void, your body goes into a sort of shock-induced conservation mode. The problem usually isn't lack of food, it is dehydration and what they call crush syndrome. If a heavy object is resting on your leg for hours, the muscle tissue starts to break down and release toxins. If the rescuers lift that weight off too quickly without medical intervention, those toxins rush to the heart and kidneys and can kill the person instantly. So sometimes, the doctors have to actually crawl into the tunnel and start an IV or perform a field amputation before the person is even moved.
Wait, so the act of saving them can actually be what kills them? That's a terrifying dynamic. How do they treat that in the field?
They use massive amounts of intravenous fluids to flush the kidneys before the pressure is released. They also use medications to stabilize the heart's electrical activity because the potassium released from damaged muscles can cause a heart attack. It's why you'll often see a doctor leaning into the rubble pile alongside the guy with the shovel. They are working in tandem to make sure the rescue isn't a death sentence.
That is a terrifying thought. The rescue itself can be lethal if not done with surgical precision. I think about the people in Haifa and the families waiting behind the police tape. Every time a crane moves or a dog barks, your heart must stop.
And that is why the Homefront Command is so respected. They aren't just soldiers, they are engineers, doctors, and specialists who train for this specific nightmare every single day. When that building in Haifa went down, they weren't just guessing. They were applying decades of data from earthquake zones and previous strikes. It is a science of hope, really. You are using the highest levels of physics and technology to find a single spark of life in a mountain of gray dust.
It makes me wonder about the future of this tech. We are talking about microwave radar and fiber optics, but with AI integration, I imagine we are going to see even more precise detection. Maybe drones that can fly into tiny gaps, or sensors that can map a building's internal voids in 3 dimensions instantly.
We are already seeing the start of that. There are research teams working on insect-scale robots that can crawl through gaps as small as a few millimeters to carry sensors into the heart of a collapse. And with the kind of processing power we have now, we can take the acoustic data from 20 different sensors and use AI to filter out the background noise of the city to find that one specific scratching sound. Imagine a drone the size of a dragonfly that can fly into a crack, find the survivor, and act as a two-way radio.
That sounds like science fiction, but given how fast things are moving, it's probably only a few years away. It would certainly take a lot of the physical risk off the human rescuers.
But at the end of the day, someone still has to pick up a shovel. Someone still has to crawl into a dark hole and pull a person out. The tech finds them, but the courage of the rescuers is what actually saves them. You can have all the AI in the world, but you still need a human being willing to crawl under 50 tons of unstable concrete to hold the survivor's hand.
It is a sobering reminder of the reality on the ground. Daniel, thanks for sending this in. It is a tough topic, but understanding the sheer amount of effort and expertise that goes into these operations is important. It gives you a lot of respect for the people who run toward those clouds of dust.
It really does. And it emphasizes why building codes and safe rooms, things we have talked about before, are so vital. When the engineering of the building fails, the engineering of the rescue is all that is left. In Israel, the Mamad, or reinforced security room, is designed to stay intact even if the rest of the building pancakes. Many of the survivors in these types of strikes are found precisely because they made it into those voids.
Well, I think we have covered the technical side of how they navigate these disasters. It is a mix of ancient listening techniques and space-age radar, all held together by some very brave people.
We should probably move toward the practical takeaways for people who might find themselves in a situation like this, or even just for those who want to understand the civil defense side of things better.
Right. The first thing that jumps out at me is the importance of individual voids. If you're in a building that is failing, getting near heavy structural furniture isn't just an old wives' tale. It is a recognized tactic that creates the pockets these rescuers are looking for.
And for anyone near a site like this, the vibration management is a huge one. If you see a rescue operation happening, staying away isn't just about giving them space to work. It is about reducing the acoustic and physical noise that could interfere with their sensors. Every car that drives by is a distraction for the sensitive microphones trying to find a heartbeat. If you're a bystander, the best thing you can do is be silent and stay back.
And finally, the psychological side. Understanding that these operations take time. When we see a building collapse on the news and we don't hear about survivors for 12 hours, it doesn't mean they aren't looking. It means they are doing that careful, methodical work to ensure they don't make the situation worse. Speed is often the enemy of safety in USAR.
Patience is a hard thing to ask for in a tragedy, but in urban search and rescue, it is a literal lifesaver. You have to remember that they are essentially building a mine shaft in reverse. It's a slow, deliberate process of peeling back the layers of a tragedy.
Well said. This has been a heavy one, but a necessary one. Thanks again to Daniel for the prompt. We always appreciate the deep dives he sends our way, even when they come from such a tragic place. It's important to shine a light on the people doing this work in the shadows of the rubble.
And thanks to our producer Hilbert Flemingtop for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes and making sure we stayed on track with the technical details.
Big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show and allow us to process all this data. This has been My Weird Prompts.
If you found this episode enlightening, please consider leaving us a review on your podcast app. It really helps the show grow and reach more people who are interested in the intersection of technology and real-world crises.
You can find us at myweirdprompts.com for our RSS feed, show notes, and more information on the systems we discussed today. Until next time.
Take care and stay safe out there.
Signing off. This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash, text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We shake